girls. Good morning. Today I'm going to share a story called Betsy Ross by Alexandra Wallner. And some important dates I want you to notice as I'm reading is 1775, the Continental Congress was established, and it was the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And then finally, what were Betsy Ross's contributions to early America? And the reason I phrased it like that is there's an obvious thing that she contributed. But what else did she do? What were the small things that she did as a patriot to support her country? When we read stories like this, I know it's a picture book, so sometimes our audience thinks that, oh, it must be for kindergarten, first, second grade. But actually, this is written for 4th or 5th grade level. And it's got great historical information that you can then go reference in other sources, primary sources or secondary sources. So I would encourage you to listen to this if you are studying the Revolutionary War. All right, Betsy Ross. I also like that she's a female character from history. Elizabeth Griscom was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on January 1st, 1752. Elizabeth, called Betsy by her family, was the 8th child of 17 born to Samuel and Rebecca. Her family were Quakers, a religious group that believed in living in a simple, peaceful way. The family was so large that the children had to help with chores. Betsy helped by sewing the white caps Quaker girls wore every day. So right there you get a little piece of the history about early America and how lives were lived. For example, 17 children seems like a lot to us, but back in the day that wasn't uncommon. You had a high mortality rate. That means a lot of children caught illnesses and passed away. Betsy attended the Friends School with other Quakers and children from wealthy families. Besides learning reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and history, students performed a 4-hour task each day. Betsy used this time to sew. She enjoyed creating quilts and samplers with complicated designs. Betsy's needlework was the most beautiful in Philadelphia, and she won many prizes for it. That's pretty neat. Some of you have probably won prizes. When Betsy was a teenager, she begged her parents to let her work outside their home. Her parents agreed to let her work for an upholsterer, sewing the coverings for sofas, chairs, and other furniture. In the shop, she met a worker named John Ross, and they fell in love. Betsy married him in 1773, even though he wasn't a Quaker. The Quakers and her parents disapproved of her marrying someone outside of the Quaker faith. I bet that didn't go over well. And I don't know why there's so many cats included in this. I don't know if it's because the historian knew that she liked cats, or they were common, or if the writer liked cats. But if you notice, almost every page includes a feline. I love looking at the details in books. At this time, America was made up of only 13 colonies on the East Coast, ruled by King George III of England. The colonials did not like being under English rule. In 1775, their newly formed government, the Continental Congress, established by an American army to fight the British. The first battles were fought in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, on April 19, 1775, and marked the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Although Philadelphians knew about the fighting, business went on as usual. Betsy and John set up a small shop in 1775. They worked long hours to make their business succeed. And here are the homes. And you'll notice they're quite close together. They did have cities by this time in American history. Highly flammable cities, so you never knew when your building would catch on fire, but nonetheless. John joined the army. One night in 1776, he was guarding a storehouse full of ammunition that exploded. For months, Betsy nursed him with herbs and home remedies. Despite her care, John died. Betsy was now a widow who ran her business alone in a shop on Archer Street. After work, she made musket balls to help the American cause, going against the Quakers' peaceful ways. So I want to remind you, what were Betsy Ross's contributions to early America? Okay, and on Arch Street, I think I said Archer before, she worked, after work she made musket balls, so she made the ammunition. General George Washington, the commander-in-chief of the army, wanted the colonials to have a flag. Not only would it be a symbol of the colonials' independence from England, it would also stand for the colonies fighting together. He sketched a design for a flag and showed it to his close friends, Robert Morris and Colonel George Ross. Colonel Ross, John's uncle, suggested that Betsy sew the flag. The three men called on Betsy in her small shop. So this is some disputed history. I've heard different variations on this. So bear in mind that different perspectives do exist in history about things and how they happen. When General Washington showed his sketch, Betsy looked at it and frowned. "Why not have a 5-pointed star instead of a 6-pointed one?" she said. "5-pointed stars are easier to sew and they waste less cloth." The men looked doubtful, so she took a scrap of cloth, folded it, and with one snip of her scissors cut a 5-pointed star. "And I think the flag should be shaped like a rectangle. It would look better waving in the wind than the square flag drawn by General Washington." The men were impressed by Betsy's design and agreed that it was better. So here we have her demonstrating how to do that. And again, look at all those cats. Betsy took great care in making the first American flag. She sewed 13 stars shaped in a circle on a blue field. She placed it against 13 red and white stripes. So remember, the flag is a symbol, it's symbolic, and you can hear the plan, so pay attention to that plan as I read the next pages. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. The 13 colonies became the 13 United States of America. On June 14th, 1777, Betsy's flag was described at a meeting of Congress and a resolution was passed. The minutes of the meeting read, "Resolved, the flag of the United States be 13 stripes alternated red and white, that the Union be 13 stars in a blue field representing a new constellation." And then during the war, Betsy became well known for her beautiful flags, but her reputation as an upholsterer grew as well. She got many important jobs. She worked for Benjamin Franklin, the Society of Free Quakers, and the State House of Pennsylvania. In 1777, Betsy married Joseph Ashburn, a sea captain. Joseph was often away from home. During one of his voyages, British soldiers occupied Philadelphia for a few months. Many citizens left the city, but Betsy stayed to run her business, even though she was alone. Soldiers camped in her house. She was polite to them, but she always let them know whose side she was on. The soldiers came to respect this lone, hard-working woman and called her the Little Rebel. So again, what were Betsy Ross's contributions to early America? She's gently protesting and doing the best she can, and she continues to thrive. During a sea battle with England, Joseph was taken prisoner. In 1782, when the war was over, Betsy learned from a friend named John Claypool that Joseph had died in an English prison. Meanwhile, Betsy and Joseph's first child, Zillah, had died, and their second child, Elizabeth, had been born. Now Betsy was a widow again. John Claypool and Betsy's friendship grew. In 1783, John became Betsy's third husband. This is very unusual in this time in history. Usually it was the women who died in childbirth, so they tended not to have multiple husbands. The men tended to marry because their wives passed on. So Betsy obviously has great fortitude, great health, because she has had 3 husbands. Okay? They joined the Society of Free Quakers, which permitted marriage outside the faith. Betsy could worship in the church once again. So here we go. I just think it's kind of neat, the history of this woman's life. Together, Betsy and John had 5 children: Clarissa, Susanna, Rachel, Jane, and Harriet, who died as a baby. Although John was a sea voyager, Betsy asked him to come and work in her flourishing upholstery shop. She needed his help. But John grew bored with the upholstery business and went to work for the U.S. Customs House. He became ill the last few years of his life. John died in 1817. Betsy taught sewing to her daughters, her granddaughters, and her nieces. When they grew up, they helped her run the business. So here she is nursing her ill husband and her children in the background. At age 75, and remember, people didn't live that long back then either, so, you made it to 50, that was pretty amazing. So that she lived till 75, or at the age of 75, she's still going strong, is another really amazing thing in history. At age 75, Betsy finally retired. Wow. Her eyesight was failing, and one of her children read the Bible to her as she sat by the fire. Betsy liked to tell stories about her life. Her favorite story was the one about making the American flag. Betsy died in 1836. The people who knew her told her story about the flag. Finally, in 1870, her grandson, William J. Canby, made Betsy's story public in an address to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And then Betsy was buried on Arch Street in the garden of the house she once ran as an upholstery shop. The flag of the United States flies 24 hours a day over her grave. And then there's an author's note here that I'm going to share with you because I believe it gives some background knowledge about where this information comes from. We know many facts about Betsy Ross's life, but there are also many conflicting stories. Some historians suggest that she won contests for her needlework. Others say she did not. Some historians do not agree that British soldiers were quartered in Betsy's home in 1777, although her grandniece Susan Satterthwaite Newport reported that not only were they there, they also referred to her as the Little Rebel. There is no absolute proof that Betsy Ross sewed the first American flag. The story of the flag, commissioned by George Washington, was passed down by Betsy's relatives and friends. However, George Washington, George Ross, and Robert Morris were in Philadelphia during the time that Betsy Ross said they came to her house. In 1963, Reeves Wetherill, a descendant of one of Betsy Ross's colonial friends, Samuel Witherhill, presented a little paper star with the signature of Clarissa Claypool Wilson at a luncheon of the Philadelphia Flag Day Association. Clarissa Claypool carried on her mother's business after she died, and it is possible she gave Betsy Ross's famous star pattern to Samuel Witherhill. In my version of Betsy Ross's story, I favored the accounts of her life in the book The Truth About the Betsy Ross Story by Robert Morris. So what I really like about this author, Alexandra Wallner, is that she has this note about where she did her research so that you can confirm it. You can also hear that she openly says, this might not be exactly how it happened, but this is the story she favored. I hope you enjoyed Betsy Ross, and I hope it sparks some discussions in your classrooms or at home about the history of the United States. Thank you.